So up next is the legal implications for reality capture, something that is bordering on how transparent should we be and the detriments of not being transparent. So take it away, Brianna.
Really thankful that we had Josh and James on the call, James from the insurance side and Josh from the legal side, to say it's all about educating ourselves about what does our contract say and making sure that we understand what are the tools, activities, and outputs that we want to use during the duration of the project, and what does our legal language say at the beginning, and having the conversation about how do we want to share this, how can we trust the information that's being shared, what verification is required. And if you don't have those conversations early on in the project, you're going to end up in the same spot, because that blanket language is becoming more and more prevalent, where people are shifting the risk away. And if you don't have the conversation about how can we share the risk in order to share the data, you're not going to get to that point. So I think it's worth listening to the conversation and educating yourself so that the next project you go to, you can have better contract language or better ways to share the data that's being collected, that at the end of the day is going to be discoverable. And let's find better ways to get that data to everyone earlier in the project. Well, I think we've got a few people here, so we can start by going around the room and doing some introductions.
Hey guys, I'm Ben Stocker with Skender. We're a general contractor in Chicago. And what reality capture tools we use? We use everything from StructionSite for 360 photos to drones and laser scanning and a little bit of everything.
Yeah, hi, I'm Hugh. I run product at CSI's Crosswalk. Have in the past used a number of different things. Recently, actually, the Sitescape and a few other apps that are using the LiDAR. Beyond that, most of what we've done was more in the modeling side and less in the capture.
Hugh was also nice enough to send me a Clubhouse invite, so thank you, Hugh.
I have 4 more, by the way. They're apparently they like me.
Great to have you here. Okay, DJ.
I feel like I have to do an intro. All right. My name is DJ. Was in the general contractor side for years. I have now been at Procore for a year now, and what's called a strategic product consultant, which is fancy term for somebody coming from industry, specifically focusing on the BIM VDC tools. But was early adopter of StructionSite and some other tools and integrations while I was a director of construction technology at Excel Construction. So know lots of people, have been in and out of the CPC space. So it's glad to be here and start making some connections again.
Awesome. Glad to have you here, DJ. And we've got Lisa.
Lisa Duncan. I'm one of the co-founders of Innovative Construction Technology, or ICT for short. So most of you have probably seen the ICT Tracker app. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and I hate to say that. So, I love to say it, but then you start dating yourself. So I was way back when we were moving folks from AutoCAD to Revit, or actually way before that. But anyway, the whole world of BIM started, I would say maybe 15 years ago, but we're really talking about the world of BIM. But anyway, I love being in this group because it gives me an opportunity to see how people are capturing, or how companies are capturing data in multiple different ways. ICT Tracker is just one way. And I just look for opportunities to collaborate and work with folks in the field. So glad to be here.
A little bit of a backstory on how we got here to this conversation, talking about legal with regards to reality capture, was when we started talking about the different types of reality capture and some of the struggles that the industry is facing. we really ended up on this kind of summary of there are a lot of different reality capture tools that are out there and tons of different ways that you can use those tools to get a specific output. And that output is going to be really what's required by the specific customer or the end user or the person going out trying to collect some information. And what we talked about was you really need to say, what activity am I doing? What is the best tool to use for that activity to get the output that I need? And what we kept struggling with was the output is going to have a different tolerance or a different requirement to it, depending on what it's going to be used for, right? Depending on what the activity is, where your output is going to be going. And we kept coming back to this, we're all capturing this data in different silos, and we're doing it in our own space because we don't want to share the risk on our projects. We want to shift risk away. And it really came down to, if we could find better ways to share this data, if we could be able to have common integrations or common ways to transfer things between, different team members, different platforms, common language for the way the data is organized, it would really benefit the teams. But the struggle that we kept coming to is that concept of sharing risk versus shifting risk. And that really pushes back to the contract side and the legal struggle of, people want to cover themselves and they don't want to share information that could be of not a benefit to them. So that is why we've got Josh on the line.
Yeah, thanks. And I think I was actually kind of like an off kind of beat addition to this roundtable, but perhaps my background will lend some, opportunity to talk about maybe the bigger issue of this whole data sharing. But I'm Josh Levy. I'm a construction lawyer by background. I was a construction management major and decided I didn't want to be a project manager. So I went and practiced construction law after going to law school. And I've, over the last 6 years, gone and led a couple of legal departments for large builders. So my current day job is I'm the contracts lead and director of a large EPC contractor named Wood Engineering. I don't know if anyone's heard of them, but British company with a large EPC business in North and South America, which is headquartered here in Atlanta. And I lead the legal advisory department for that by day. Satyam knows me, and I don't know if I know anybody else on this call, but actually about a year ago, I founded a tech company called Document Crunch, which is, for those of you on this call who are familiar with Pipe, which is Satyam's prior company, Document Crunch is a very related type of a concept. So myself and actually another lawyer who I've worked extensively with over my career essentially took natural language processing and we taught it to find in construction contracts and insurance policies and other documents the types of issues that we would have looked for if we were reviewing the contract or insurance policy, whatever. And in addition to that, and I see DJ, you're nodding, so you must know about our relationship with Procore as well. I know I haven't met you before, but we're integrated with Procore. But in addition to just finding the critical issues, we've taken it a step further. And I think this may go to some of what is the theme here. So the first thing is we'll find the issues. But the second thing that we do is, in a very interactive way, we tell you why those issues should be important to you. We're not replacing your lawyers. We're not going to tell you if they're good or bad, or you should sign it or accept it or qualify it or not, call 911. We're just going to tell you either in our own words, like in my words as a construction practitioner, or more importantly for the big companies that are already using us in their own words, why that issue is important, what's the company's policies, preferences, procedures related to that, et cetera. And then, we don't answer the third question, which I often get asked, which is, okay, so now what do I do? We leave that. Our thesis is, if we provide the end user, in this case, project managers, lawyers, whoever, across the ecosystem in the construction industry, if we provide them with what is the critical provisions, why is that provision important, we think that we've given them like a huge key to the quagmire, which is normally, how do I manage my risks in my contracts and other documents? So with that said, and that's the basic product, what it's really ultimately a mule for in the long run, and I think Satyam and DJ for their respective organizations will appreciate this, is we are now gaining huge data insights. And Lisa, you spoke to this as well. And we are going to be able to use those big data insights to help make this industry better over time. So I'll just give you like the most innocuous example that I can think of, because in my world, what happens, I've negotiated, I don't know, $10 billion in construction contracts for GCs. You know what an owner often says to me? All of your peers accept this. You have to accept this. All your peers are doing it. And that's like a thing that if anybody's ever bid a job, and subcontractors hear that from contractors all the time, contractors hear that from owners all the time. That's the culture of this industry, right? All your peers do this, so you should do it. That's a vicious cycle. What if, I'm just gonna, and BIM is related to this. What if I could say that's a very interesting position you've taken. I actually surveyed 10,000 construction contracts in this region over the last 7 years. And actually only about 4% of my peers are taking this. That's not a fair term. That's not what's market. That's not what the benefit of the industry is ultimately pushing or striving toward, right? So you start to think about just the overall concept of data sharing, open sourcing information, unlocking kind of this subject matter siloed expertise, whether it's legal or BIM or otherwise. And by the way, I'm happy to talk about the contract risks around BIM. I've been in the commercial construction space my whole career. And so I've dealt with a lot of this before. But just the overall idea of getting out of the siloed mindset and moving toward a more collaborative industry where you start to think about not risk shifting, but risk sharing is a pretty powerful concept. And I think that a lot of what I'm doing with Document Crunch reinforces that. And I think that because of that, Nathan asked me to come and join this panel, but I'm not like, so I guess the long story is I'm not a BIM guy, or the short story is I'm not a BIM guy. So I don't really belong in that regard, but I think I have some perspective over risk sharing and just kind of big data insights as well. So that's me. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here, and we're glad to have the legal and construction experience combined to kind of talk about, how can we share risk and allow us to share better data. And James, you have a slightly different take on things with your background.
My name is James Boileau. I'm with Zurich Insurance and been here 19 years. My background is actual civil engineering, worked construction management prior to coming to the insurance side on the loss control. So my role with Zurich is the construction technical director. And one of the things that we're working with our clients on is how to assess risk and then how to manage that. And so, as Joshua and I and Nathan were talking kind of before this and kind of going over stuff, there's what risk is there to doing it, but what is the risk of not sharing the data? And when we look at claims for whether it's a construction defect claim or an injury or some sort of a property loss, it's usually because of not having the proper information. Somebody dropped the ball here and the other team never even knew about something going on through either the model or through documentation or even just what the plan was. And so the perspective I bring to that is just, what does that risk look like, and what's insurable, what's not insurable, and a lot of the time it's not an insurable risk. So
awesome. And so we've got the insurance side, who they obviously want to document as much as possible. We have the legal side, who can share kind of some insights about how we could better write these contracts and accept better terms. And then now I'm going to ask Dustin to give a little bit of maybe a real world situation with reality capture and where legal has kind of been an issue for us.
So I'm Dustin. My company Flywheel, we do a lot of reality capture and a lot of specifically civil BIM, but I think that BIM and the reality capture are really similar in the ways that are sometimes some of the silliness that goes on behind the scenes, where BIM, a lot of times if we're doing a model for coordinate pre-construction, so at the very beginning of construction, we may also have a model coming from the design team, but we're recreating that model completely from scratch because there's no, we're not given the right to utilize any of it. And I think that's kind of silly that we need to get to a point where we can say that these are the pieces of it that we can use, and then take it, obviously coordinate it and add better, higher level of development. And a lot of and related to reality capture though, there's a lot of the same thing going on. We have this build environment, or it's in construction, and a lot of people on the project are maybe on different teams, or different contractors working on it are doing some sort of reality capture, and one of those types could be fulfilling several different maybe there's laser scanning and 360 photos going on, where the laser scan with pictures would suffice for everything, but it's being done by multiple different people, and those people don't want to share. I think it's actually a little bit funny that as the industry matures, the reality capture side of it, at the beginning, I feel like we saw everyone sharing all the time. It seems like it's been pulled back even a little bit after they see the power of it. And then maybe there was some sort of issue where their own data that they collected got them in an uncomfortable conversation. And maybe, and a lot of it could even be just a better communication of what it can be used for, or what the accuracy is, so that people can decide what they can use it for and things like that. So just if we can touch on some of those things, I think that would be really beneficial. Another thing from just, there's a lot of third-party reality capture companies out there, similar to us, doing this work, and it might be an expensive kind of endeavor, but it's not that much. It's not a lot of money to the contractors, to the reality capture team, and we're reviewing these contracts that are by default putting tons of liability onto us, and in all the contract language is different. So it would be nice, actually, to, I think, Josh's point, like the startup industry has these safe contracts and things like that are all standardized. Especially if you're smaller, you just kind of refer to these like standardized contracts, and if it doesn't match that, then it's something you might want to have someone else look at, in addition. That's just something we run into a lot. We're constantly doing drone flights on projects, because we focus on high accuracy for actual measurement, whereas the project may have some like weekly flight that's not to that standard. But there's no reason for us to be both flying the same day. We should share it.
Yeah, and I think that just comes down to the output, because at the end of the day, you could be, so if we're looking at this specific slide, the reality capture activity that Dustin just brought up is his specific drone flight is for high accuracy for measurement. So he has specific 360 cameras or scans that are being done to create a specific output that is used for measurements. And who can rely on that information and how can they rely on it needs to be set up and clear to everyone, versus that weekly flight where it's just used for progress documentation, maybe just used to share exactly what happened on the job, but not something that's being used for measure. So the output of that is going to be different. And then how are those individuals that are relying on that output able to differentiate what they can use that reality capture data for? So I guess going back to the tool activity output, you have to understand what you can use that information for and how, in order to share the information correctly. So, I mean, Josh, just going back to the legal perspective here, how would you set up your contract, or how would you think about setting the project team up for success to be able to say, these are the different types of data and how we can use them. So maybe like, what is the right of reliance for this information?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that there's like a couple of things going on. So, obviously it's the construction industry. So everything starts with the owner, right? And so the owner's considerations on data is a really big deal. And, to me, there's a difference between building a proprietary racking system in a data center for, a Silicon Valley company that won't let you even utter their name, versus, let's just say a pretty run-of-the-mill hotel or multifamily product. And so I think that sensitivity to that information becomes, highly important to what you can ultimately do with it. But let's put aside the fact that top secret design systems, whatever it is, I don't ever foresee there being a reason or a justification for allowing those models, those BIM models, whatever it is, to be shared, or any of the data associated with those facilities. The reality is, and it's kind of similar even in the world that I live in with contracts, the reality is most stuff is just not that proprietary in our industry at this time. And so, okay, so let's talk about the other 80% of what's out there. We can all be better by having access to those models. Ultimately, having access to those models would drive costs down, right? So I guess, and driving costs down would benefit everybody from the owner to the contractor, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm, philosophically from a legal negotiation standpoint, I'm pretty open to sharing of information. I think where it gets fuzzy is when you're talking about highly proprietary information. And again, that's very dependent upon who the end user or the owner of that project would be. But I think that, I'll pick on two people on this call in particular. Institutions like James's, Zurich, right? They get to make actuarial decisions based upon having transparency into that data. And there's nothing more precise than that. And then you have an organization like DJ's, Procore, right? Procore is in a really interesting spot, a really interesting cross-section of the industry, because they have all this data. And you start to think about, if you unlocked some of that, how that could be used to better the industry. The same goes with this whole topic that we're talking about, BIM. It's the same, philosophy as it applies to that as well. And I saw someone was nodding, so please chime in. But that's my approach. DJ, I think you were going to say something.
Well, and I guess it's kind of like we're talking about a couple of tangential things in reality capture. I'll go back to kind of some of my experiences. So my first exposure into reality capture was laser scanning back in 2013. And that was more specifically on using a laser scanner to kind of validate existing conditions, to start shaking out, is the building this actual size? Can we actually use this and leverage this to model and then coordinate systems from, right? It was something that we as the GC took on as our own risk, because I think the biggest thing when it comes to contracts and all that messiness is once you start stepping on the toes of means and methods, then that's when people kind of bristle. Reality capture can be sending out 10 guys and giving them a tape measure and letting them go measure everything up. I mean, it's kind of it was a looser term, as long as you're going out to validate existing conditions. And I think that's where laser scanning kind of really started. We would take that laser scan and kind of create some documentation, which Dustin's probably very familiar with, push it back to the design team. And the architect could be like, that's great, but it's your responsibility to validate the conditions. If it's going to change our design, let us know through an RFI.
Shifting. Correct.
We've tried to share it with them, say like, hey, or even do it earlier. It wasn't until when I was at Excel and it was this project in 2017 there in Sacramento. It was a small behavioral health TI. We went in and scanned early, found the building was 2 feet shorter and a foot wider, and which means it totally threw off all their space program because it was for Kaiser and they had this custom, or they had these specific furniture pieces. They couldn't fit all the programming in there. And luckily the design team was very thankful for that information. We were able to make that change. But I mean, yeah, it's kind of like had Josh had said, it's still tied up in contracts. You can have somebody who is willing to collaborate with you, but I've also been told that's not what the contract says. Contract tells me this, so this is the scope. You know, when somebody knows that you've got them, they're going to be like, well, that's not what the contract says. And that's when, that's where I think that whole circle of trust gets violated, where then you have some people who use the contract as a weapon to kind of enforce what they need to get done. And that's why people are just so standoffish these points. Seems like we had, I see Rob join, and Rob and Dustin, some of these others, we've been in the BIM space or this whole space the whole time. Where you seemed like 10 years ago, it seems like we were really making some headway in the BIM space and like really like getting there. And then it just seems like it's what's happened. This exposure to more risks and accuracy and all that other stuff caused it to almost pull back. You'd be like, oh no, we don't need that. You guys are just taking up too much time trying to figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
And it was like, go ahead.
It comes down to we have this data, but how can all of us use it in the most constructive way? And how can we use this to move the project forward without someone saying, if you use this and it doesn't work as expected, it's not my fault? Because we have to be able to take some element of that risk and share it and say, look, I'm going to validate what you did and spot check it myself. And then I'm going to share that back. And now all of us can use this with even more confidence. But right now, everyone's so siloed that they end up just duplicating the work or doing it again themselves. Ben, maybe you can speak to this from the contractor side. Like, how often do you have different subcontractors scanning or photographing the exact same thing on your project where you're just duplicating efforts because there's no risk sharing?
Yeah,
there's no trust.
A lot more often than I'd like. That's the answer there. It kind of goes to what Dustin was saying earlier, though, in your intro. You were talking about how people used to share a lot more, and it's becoming less like that. I think it has to do a lot with just the accessibility of all of the means of reality capture. Like before, I mean, it's always been relatively accessible, but you might have, one specialty company that everyone would go to and like, all right, this is the model, this is the scan we're all using. But now as more companies get into it, they're like, no, we're doing our own stuff now. And like, that's great for your own company, but then it hurts when you start combating with everyone. Like, I'll go out and scan a space and you'd be like, all right, here's the floor flatness analysis that I did or something. And then we hand it over to our flooring contractors and they're like, well, this is great, but we can't use this. We'll maybe look at it and use it as a guide, but we have to go do our own survey too. And they might do, a much less accurate survey than what I did. And it's like, well, this is better though. Like, why can't you use that?
FFL measurements from the data that I gave you, but instead you use dumber data and, got your information, but it's not as accurate.
Yeah, but if I may, this is Hugh. I wonder if, and I'm assuming the reason why legal is in the title of the session is people do that because when their ass is on the line, excuse my language, I can't say, well, the guy over there gave me a survey that said it was this way. So, I mean, obviously that's what's driving this, right? Is that people are collecting documentation for a potential future dispute. So they have to own it. They have to be able to say, I can tell you how this was gathered and I own the machine. Is that kind of why we're here?
Yeah, it all comes down to, I feel like legal comes in when something goes wrong. And, someone, going back to tool activity output, someone did a scan, they output some sort of data and then they shared it with the team. And someone else in that team then used that output for some other activity. And they said, I'm going to take this and I'm going to use it for something else that it probably doesn't have the right accuracy for, or maybe it was taken out of context. And then that problem compounded and legal gets involved at the end of the day because something was wrong and there was some cost incurred. And now they have to say, well, I used this data that was shared with me without some caveat. Josh, chime in where he's.
So I want to back up a few comments ago, because I think the root cause is what DJ said earlier. Okay, so I just learned something, by the way, from Ben too, right? So me, the lawyer who gets to negotiate all these fun agreements, heard from Ben that something super inefficient happens on his job sites every single day when, you know, he's got numerous parties out there scanning and photographing the same stuff. And if there was just a centralized repository of that stuff, perhaps there would be a lot less waste on his project. In my over a decade of being a construction lawyer, I've never considered that nuance that I just have learned from Ben. So let me walk back to what DJ said. DJ said, okay, so the people in the field want to collaborate, but then someone finds out the contract prohibits them from doing so because of what Brianna just described as all the potential pitfalls down the road. Well, where is the alignment between the people who are negotiating these contracts and the people that need to have the information or that could be more efficient in their management of the project? Where is that alignment? And part of that is a challenge to people like me, but I think it's also a challenge to the operators. You know, how involved are you all in owning the deal and negotiating the contract? And are you weighing in? I mean, I spent a lot of time in the scopes and kind of understanding the general construction process. I have never spent not 1 minute considering the conundrum that Ben just outlined. To me, it's a pretty easy conundrum to ameliorate or fix in a contract. And going back to kind of Hugh's point, yes, the line would be, you know, when you go into litigation mode, but everything up until then, and with even disclaimers that say, yeah, I'm going to share this with you, but you know, if you're going to use this to go and build a new structure on top of, that's on you. Like, I'm not taking responsibility for that. That's easy enough to do as well. But what I've heard here is a simple misalignment between what's actually needed and what information people like me may ultimately have. And so I would challenge this group to get more transparent with what's in the contract before it gets signed, to get more involved and proactive and make sure that the facilitate your work, not hinder, in Ben's case or DJ's case or Hugh's case, your work. So that's just, you know, that was a very interesting perspective.
It's almost like you, I mean, it's just, yeah, we could go in this whole long conversation about contracts, but it's almost like, I guess like for Dustin, who's a third party, is like you would create a scope of work with defined expectations and tolerances and things like that, which is great. But then you get an owner who says like, I want 1/16 inch tolerances and it's going to do the other stuff. And Dustin's like, okay, we can do that. It's going to cost you X amount of dollars. Oh no, that's way too expensive. I don't want to do that. We'll just fly by the seat of our pants. It seems like, you know, for a lot of us like BIM and some of the other ones who've been in this space, Lisa, all the other ones, like, I don't want to do BIM. It takes too long. It's unreliable. You get one shot. And as soon as you fail or they go to use that information and it's inaccurate, they're done. They'll never trust it again. And you've lost your opportunity. And then I think that's what we're kind of going up against. It's, yeah, everybody wants to slide the risk downhill. That's why GCs are a low margin business and all the money's in the specialty contractors, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who take all the risk. It's just, yeah, I would love for architects when I was in the space to take more responsibility on the modeling side, but right now the contracts don't back that up and they don't get paid to make very accurate models. They get paid to provide 2D construction drawings. Mm-hmm. And they tell you, and they pass it down to everybody else. Like Rob could go on for this like hours of, look, here's the building, you build it. It just needs to hit this dollar amount and you need to hit this schedule. However else you do it, it's on you.
We're back to tool activity output. Right now, the tool for models is, you know, we're gonna do 3D, but it's really for preparation of 2D drawings. So the output is not the quality that we want to use it for. So who's gonna take the responsibility to get it to that state and to validate it so that it can all be shared? Or in the example of floor flatness, like how can we say, here's my scan data, you can use this, this is, you know, the tolerances that it's going to meet, and here's, you know, how we can share it. And what I ask of you, if you're going to use it, that you validate it, that you confirm it, and that you accept responsibility based on, et cetera. I mean, this goes back to what Josh was saying, is that we all have to have that conversation of, you know, what is the output and how are we using it? before we share it. And we can't just use things blind, right? Like you can't just say, I'm going to use a photo to get scan quality point clouds out of it. You can't do that. So we have to have the conversations of how are we using this data?
And I will also tell you again, as somebody who's negotiated a fair amount of contracts in my day, the amazing thing for this group, you may be surprised, or you may say, yeah, we get it. BIM is not really a hot button topic in these negotiations. Like to me, the BIM, addendum or protocols, those are kind of like a throwaway topic. Those are a skim, and whatever you get, you get. So I think part of, this group who's very vested in BIM would be, you need to raise the profile of why that's important to the project. What Ben just said is that was like a career changing moment for me, if you will, because I learned something. But, and maybe I would think twice about, pushing to have a better BIM framework just based on that alone. So anyway, I just think that's, it's incumbent upon this group of stakeholders to make sure that you're, pushing for that and seeking transparency for the people that are cutting the deals that you ultimately have to live with. So that when DJ goes and asks his buddy to share something in the field, his buddy wants to share it, and he says, actually, I'm sending you a demand letter from my lawyer clawing that. Like it's crazy, right? But there's not an alignment there.
And think
But I
about
think,
how
Josh, the
Go ahead.
biggest thing, sorry, I think the biggest thing, Josh, is then, as I've said before, you're getting into a means and methods discussion. You as the owner is telling you're telling the general contractor how to build the project. I've been on projects, Rob does a lot of those with his scope of work. I've done them where sometimes full-blown 3D spatial BIM coordination doesn't make sense. And you can take 2D drawings and go coordinate it and go build a building and be very successful. There's a lot of companies out there who do this every day, and they do it very well. But then there are other projects that definitely have a means where you have to at least do some of that stuff. But again,
Sometimes it's a mix. Same
yeah.
job. I mean,
yeah.
we have jobs where there's a very dense corner of the building that we need to use BIM for coordination, and then the whole rest of it is pretty basic, like hotel rooms where we can do overlays. But I think it goes back to, like you said, the means and methods. I mean, we don't even say BIM anymore. We don't put BIM in our GMPs. We don't put BIM in our contracts. I don't have a BIM exhibit. I don't demand BIM out of the subs. At best, it's 3D coordination. And our line item in our contracts and our GMPs with the owners says MEP coordination. And if they take it out, great. So you're representing that it's fully coordinated. Awesome. I've been waiting for this for 20 years. Moving on. So I think, there was a few comments there that I wanted to comment on. I think I've always taken a slightly backwards approach to this, I guess, coming from a PM background. It's really all means and methods. Brianna, you made a comment about you can't get point cloud data from a photo, and that's absolutely technically true. But I also kind of don't care depending on where the photo came from and who misinterpreted it, because at the end of the day, I've got a list of documents in my contract with the owner that I turned around and passed on to the sub. And if the sub went off and used that point cloud, at the end of the day, it's my problem because it's always the GC's problem. But at the same time, it's like he's doing that at his own risk. And that's been the structure of my BIM scopes and BIM exhibits and all that stuff since 2009 is we're making you do this, but you're doing it at your own risk. Because at the end of the day, there's a contract document. And if you deviate from that contract document, you've got to know, follow the proper procedure for doing so. And it's in our space, it's worked pretty well to just continue to go back to the contract, like what's changing the contract and what's means and methods. And if it's means and methods, then just kind of, we need to agree on it internally with ourselves, but otherwise shut the hell up about it and don't make a big deal.
Yeah.
I think it gets lost, right? People don't do what's best. And Josh, I would love to see the comparison of contracts 10 years ago compared to where they are today. And I would imagine they have increased exponentially in length and coverage. It's like everybody says, well, this one job had this one issue. So now we're just going to globally apply this onto all of our contracts.
I had James laughing on our pre-call. Yeah, so part of my big thesis document crunch is that, over the course of 50 years, right? I mean, we've evolved from an industry where a handshake would happen, and otherwise big buildings could be built. And frankly, even if there was a contract, it was likely a lot shorter than it is today. But everybody from the superintendent all the way, up to the senior vice president of operations had done a page turn of that contract and sat down in the trailer with the
Highlighted it, noted it.
And today now we're stuck on one of them, but with a bunch of millennials who are inundated with email and BIM and models and this and that. No one has time to read. These contracts aren't getting any less sophisticated. They're in fact getting more, to DJ's point, maybe even more convoluted at times. And so, yeah, I mean, the idea is and BIM fits right in this same exact category, but it's like, what technology levers can this industry pull to cut through some of the clutter and just be more efficient? With otherwise, like going back to the whole hotel example versus the proprietary racking system in the data center, to otherwise just allow us to be more efficient with information that's fairly redundant, repetitive, and standardized at this point.
I mean, let's just go back to the most simplistic form of reality capture, which is photos. Everyone is capturing photos on the job site. Your subcontractor, your owner, your architect, everyone. How many jobs have you been a part of where everyone has access to everyone's photos? At the end of the day, if the project goes to claims and there's discovery, Josh, are those photos going to be available for everyone to see at the end of the day?
100%.
So why wouldn't we all share them during the duration of the project to give everyone better visibility? James, I'm sure you would love it from the insurance risk side and would hopefully incentivize it. But at the end of the day, it's all going to be discovered if it gets to that point, which you knock on wood, you hope it doesn't. Why are we so scared of sharing it in the moment to hopefully get some kind of benefit from it?
Do you guys think,
interesting.
do you guys think some of this is folks that are on the ground doing this have a sense that there might be some liability they don't understand, and they're like, screw it. When in doubt, don't do it. Or when in doubt,
Yes.
I mean, so I wonder if where we're going with this conversation is some, beyond people that choose to go to the CPC panels, some level of education about where the liability sits, or where the, you know what I mean? Like you were kind of saying this before, Josh, is that or sort of if, as long as you're not relying on it for things it wasn't intended for. Actually, Brianna, I think you said this. You know what I mean? Like if you're spelling out what the intent of this collection was for and what it's good for, maybe that's, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, except that clarity and understanding of implications is probably not the hardest thing in the world.
Yeah, it's kind of the right of reliance that BIM talks about constantly. It's like, what is the data? What was the output what was the activity in the output that you generated? What is the accuracy of that, and how can it be used elsewhere on the project?
So Hugh, what you just said, though, that goes right back to the thesis I was talking about before. You actually may have articulated better than I, so good job there. We've become so desensitized as an industry, and it's for good reason. It's because there's a lot more stuff on our plate operationally than there used to be. So we've gone from this condition where everybody understood the deal and could advocate for the deal and own the deal. And actually, I'll now pick on Rob because he said this before too. Having sample document crunch. We've gone from those good old days where all these executives say, I can't believe all the damn support systems that our company has, because when I was coming up, I understood every last inch of my deal and the whole contract and all the big work and whatever it is. And now everybody is so desensitized and fearful because there's so much complexity around what's going on that they're frozen by that fear. And so part of this is what, I mean, frankly, and I think BIM's, it's very analogous, but this is what the document crunch thesis is. If I give you a tool that allows you to understand what I would have looked for in the contract, because Rob, frankly, is just as smart as I am. He just doesn't have a law degree. That's literally, my mom will tell you I'm smart. The only thing that separates me and Rob is that I have a piece of paper that says that I understand contracts and Rob doesn't. Otherwise, he gets it just as much as I do. If I could give Rob a tool that just gave him that little extra nudge to understand what the deal was, frankly, Rob may not even need me for 9 out of the 10 questions. That Rob has now been trained because of our industry's condition to come to me and ask. And he can't scratch his head without seeking advice from his lawyer, let alone do something as benign as Brianna just said. Literally all this stuff's discoverable. It really is, including all the pictures on your cell phone that you sent to your spouse. Those are all discoverable too. Why not share them, right? I mean, it's common sense, but we've become gridlocked because of the fear of liability and not having an understanding. So what tools can we give ourselves as an industry, whether it's contract reviews or just better protocols? What tools can we give ourselves to share that information, to democratize that subject matter expertise, and to level up so that we can do common sense things like not hire 12 subs to take the same picture on Ben's jobs? That's crazy to me.
And everyone pay StructionSite the same cost to be the photo tool. I mean, it's great for the the tech people, but why are we paying that cost over and over again when all of us could have that shared repository that I forget who said it, but I think it was maybe you, Ben, of like, if we could all just share this information, we'd be better off, and we'd each be paying less in time and tools.
It's all about trust, right? There's just nobody trusts in each other, because at the end of the day, it's like Rob had said, and even some of the other of us have had to deal with that. Who's got the better contract, and who knows the contract better? And is my contract, do I have less holes in my contract than you?
Who did a
And can I
better
make
job
you eat it?
shifting risk?
Yeah. But I'll even go farther back. It's the stuff that doesn't get exposed. It's the horse trading that happens on site during construction between a superintendent and a foreman who go, okay, I'm not going to back charge you for, like destroying all of my drywall track because you ran over it with your scissor lift. If you go ahead and fix that kind of stuff, right? Like it's that horse trading that's part of construction. It's just what happens. But some of that stuff is like risk. And then what really happens is if somebody's actually doing some rework there and they get injured or there becomes a construction defects, then that's where it really starts going. People start pointing the fingers, but that stuff's not documented, right? You can't just say, hey, this, yeah.
You've got personal risk and you've got corporate risk. And so the question about the photos, right? And Hugh was mentioning, like, do we need to educate people that there really isn't, it's okay, you can share your pictures. There really isn't a danger. It's all going to come out in the wash if there's a lawsuit anyway. But when you're the individual guy, like, you're wondering, should I take this picture? I see there's a guy in the background standing on a bucket. If OSHA gets a hold of that and sees that it was my guy and I get in trouble, like, there's a personal risk to everybody at the job that is really, frankly, more important to them than the risk of like their company or who, it's like, oh, well, I had a job. What was it? I had a job when I found this one, right? Like, I just go work somewhere. If you don't like what I'm doing, I'll go do it somewhere else. So I think getting people to understand the way that the corporate risk affects them, like, to use the safety thing as an example, like you screw up bad enough, you can literally be criminally prosecuted for this crap. But what everybody starts with is their personal risk. The job in my background, does everybody see that job in my background, the blue building with the blue top? I built that building on Fort Lauderdale Beach during spring break. Spring breakers everywhere, all over the beach. Get to the end of the job, I asked my superintendent, hey, I know you saved a bunch of photos to your hard drive. Can I have it? Keeps dodging, right? Finally, I physically take the hard drive for him and he says, okay, listen, just be careful what you look at on there. I was taking pictures from the balcony of the beach during spring break, right? So there you go, right? Personal risk versus corporate risk. I'm trying to avoid it's a condominium. I'm trying to actually find documentation for a lawsuit for all sorts of problems. And this guy's worried about bikini pictures, creeper pictures.
Meanwhile, Josh is laughing because all of it's discoverable, including the bikini pictures.
Right. Well, I don't know if Josh may know about that building. I don't know.
Which building is it, Rob?
It's called.
Okay.
Rob should have said that. We're being recorded.
Rob,
discoverable.
Oh, I'll cut that section out. Don't worry, Rob. You're safe with me.
Oh, good. Nathan's here to save the recording snippet.
Now I'm gone.
So it's
Ben,
interesting.
you were going to say something earlier and we kind of missed you there.
Oh, I mean, I guess it's kind of backtracking a little bit, but DJ was talking about, you just have to have the trust. Oh, how can I word this? Just having the trust and, you know, to use the same source of information and stuff. And I was going to play devil's advocate and say sometimes it pays off to not trust that single source or whatever. For example, like I would love to have everyone, you know, use the same photos, use the same laser scan, same model and all that.
Yeah.
But there's one job in particular where the owner did not want to do any type of 3D coordination, any BIM or anything. We tried to, but they just did not want to. I was like, okay. And then they're like, these are the contract documents that we're using. I still went out and scanned it anyways, because we just do that to cover our asses. It's in a, 100-year-old building that doesn't have any type of existing documentation of it. So we're still going to scan it anyways. And we found a huge flaw where there was a column that was off like a good, I don't know, like 4 feet or so from where it showed on the drawings. And on the drawings, it was going to be to the side of like one of their main conference rooms. But in reality, if we had built it to their drawings, this huge, 2x2 column, or maybe even bigger, I don't know, they're gigantic. It was going to be right in the doorway of this conference, the entrance to this conference room. And it's like, in that case, if you do just, go, all right, we trust your source, then we would have been screwed and we wouldn't have figured that out until, later on, or at least until we started layout. But we were able to find this out, a couple months in advance because I didn't trust the source. So that's a little playing devil's advocate there.
That definitely makes sense. And it's Nathan put in the chat here, trust but verify. And I think it's, understanding that, someone scanned and they scanned early, and what was that scan used for? They weren't using it for BIM, so they weren't necessarily worried about the quality. They could have used photos, time-lapse images to get the scanned, the point cloud data, not an actual laser scanner. So who knows how that data was created and what it should have been used for. To your point, Ben, it was good that you didn't trust it because you didn't know how it was created or what it was created for. So you went in and did your own.
Yeah. I mean, I did trust it at the time until I found that error.
You get one chance, right?
Yeah.
One chance. And then that's it. Like you can't, I just think it's one of those things like, again, everybody wants to share, but there's got to be caveats at the end of the day. And I don't know, Josh, if it's as simple as, hey, we're going to laser scan, we're going to provide this laser scan and share it. But at the same time, we're going to take any risk associated with providing that laser scan and, that trust but verify. It's like, hey, that's what I guess is the biggest thing that totally like makes the water very murky is I've got photos, I'm going to share them, but I've got a point cloud, I'm going to share them, but right, all that stuff, instead of somebody just saying, look, we're going to do this. We think it's best for the job. May not be perfect, but at the end of the day, if investigation goes back to this being the root cause, then we'll own that. But I just don't think some people are willing to quite do so.
I think that's like the outer bounds of kind of what we're talking about here. So, every architect's transmittal that you all have ever taken says you can't rely on the electronic documents. Only the signed, sealed, stamped drawings are to be relied upon, right? So that's a very common term that I think is easy enough to do. I would understand why, in the spirit of maybe keeping the job cost down, Ben would want to appoint one subcontractor to do all the site photographs. But I also similarly understand why that one site contractor or one subcontractor for the risk. I mean, maybe photographs is the wrong example, but I think you guys get the point, like the BIM, whatever. I would understand why that subcontractor would not say, yeah, it's cool, I got liability, so now 25 people could look to me if this is not right, as opposed to just the one person that I usually contract with. Like that creates a whole world of pain where I would understand. And if I were on that, I'm all for sharing, but again, it's got to be with the appropriate risk profile. So I don't think that this discussion leads to, like we're going to just start putting our necks out for everybody on the job site because we want to save money for the job. I don't think we're going to get to that utopian, not with the American legal system where you can sue and there's big costs associated with that. But you can certainly put some reasonable constraints around it. Again, like the idea of what Brianna was talking about, yes, we're providing this for informational purposes. If you have reason to think it may not be good, you need to go do your own. You need to go verify that, and that's on you. But in the meantime, thank you, Mr. GC, or Mr. GC, thank us for providing this information for your site.
Yeah, we've done, we did a lot of laser scanning, right, for part of validating existing conditions more than anything, because the contractors were at like 80% of our work was TIs. And so it took a while to even convince my own company to do laser scanning, because they were like, well, the architect gives us drawings and we just use those. And I'm like, if you read the fine print of the drawings, they say verify. So if it's off at the end of the day, like the architects will be like, hey, you were supposed to verify, now it's on you, you read it. And then the GC pushes it down to the trade and says, well, you were supposed to verify because that's what it says. So now you get to eat it. And yeah, it's the whole like shell game. All right, fine, I'll eat that one, but I'll get you on the next change order. Which is like what Rob talks about. It's just interesting. It would be nice. I think some of the more successful projects, and some of us have probably been a part of those, is when people actually collaborate, not just specifically coordinate, when they actually want to work together and be like, hey, I noticed like something's not quite right over here with the model or in this space, you want to take a look at it. And you're like, oh yeah, there's a gap in the point cloud, or something was off a little bit. And then you fix it and everybody's good, right? That's when it's not just BIM, it's just people are working together to do the right thing. And I think that, and I'm more of an optimist and think most people want to do the right thing most of the time, but it's all about, I guess, trading as to, all right, well, that's going to cost me some money. Let's figure out how to make it work. Because at the end of the day, everybody's at risk for it, GCs particular, but then again, it's all going to go downhill. But I wish people would work together more. We live in a space where there's so much data and so much information. And I'm sorry, but there's nothing new that's being built or designed out there. It's all a beg, borrow, and steal of stuff. But why does every project have to be a custom project every time?
And why is everyone capturing, the argument here for photos is I take photos and I share them with you, and then you use them against me when I have a change order. So I just use my manpower and my tool to then be hit with it later. But at the end of the day, you had no right to the claims because it wasn't correct. At the end of the day, we're all just exposing what reality is, hence the term reality capture. And we all need to be willing to accept that that was the reality of the state of construction at that time when something was documented. And if we get to the point of discovery, it's all going to be shared and the reality is going to be exposed. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to ask that question one more time. How might we change project contracts and risk management in ways that distribute the risk of BIM, reality capture, data errors, so that stakeholders are motivated to share and maintain a reliable single source of truth? So putting that question back in our minds here, how can we help teams want to share information or better communicate how that information is being shared or what it's being used for, so that we can get to the point of having better single source of truth or having better data for everyone to access?
Let me ask a crazy question. Does anyone think there is a potential for almost a new trade that is digital information? I don't know what the trade would be, but as you say that, my first thought was, well, make somebody the responsible party for that. But then it's like, well, who's going to get all the right stuff for each? Yeah, but then who's going to make sure that they capture the right stuff for each trade? I mean, it just becomes.
Well, it's basically what Multivista tries to do, right?
Yeah.
And now they're adding laser scanning, they're adding drones, they're adding cost. That's kind of their business model. And we've got one drone service provider that we use that's now signed up with StructionSite. Like we kind of hooked them up with StructionSite because we were like, look, we don't want to do this. You need to go figure out a way to third party this stuff. You're already flying for us. We like you. You're helpful. You do it. You always give us more than we bought. Like, go figure out a way to get a license with StructionSite so you can share it with us and you can go take the photos for us. So now he's set up to do that. Now he's not as comprehensive as Multivista, where it's all going to live in his one environment. But I kind of my beef with Multivista is that it all lives in their one environment, not mine. So I think it's a great point here. I think there's absolutely an open door for like, hey, I'm a reality capture specialist. I got this van out back with a laser scanner, a Matterport, a drone, 12 360 cameras, you know, a Spot the robot dog.
Well, if you think, I mean, yeah, but if you think about even where that might go after it, is that this is the group that is responsible for the model, right? That includes the best information we've got, the IoT that, I mean, thinking down the road a little bit, but you know what I'm saying? Like you're already kind of getting there a little with some of what Procore is doing and with some of what some of the other software companies where they're trying to really update quickly what's going on. But I wonder if there isn't an emerging need for someone to be the steward of the best version of all the information. I don't know that, but this is kind of how one of the ways that new professions come about, right? Is that there's a concentration or a big overlap that if you could make that person responsible for it, they'd spend all day making damn sure everything was accurate.
I think there's an argument for that for sure, where it might, maybe the owners bought into the scenario where they want to have a lot of reality capture. They want it to have a stated accuracy, and they want everybody to have access to it, but they want this reality capture person to have like the project first mentality. So their goal isn't to satisfy their immediate client. Their immediate client is the owner and the project. So just aligning the goals, I think, kind of to Josh's point. It's just weird. Sometimes we get this misalignment where, you know, the contract says one thing and we're being verbally asked to do something completely different. And I think that's a big pain point. But this other role, whether it's fulfilled by a separate entity or some of the same project members, but you know, it's clearly stated what who they're serving and their approach.
And I want to
Be
ask
really beneficial.
James his perspective here from insurance, because insurance obviously has the ability to incentivize projects to kind of change the direction of the contract. What are your thoughts there, James?
So there's a few things that I heard. One, I use this as an example to talk about. I'm going to avoid your question for a minute. I'll come back to it though. You know, a really visual thing is, you know, drivers, and they have these cameras that can show forward and the camera. And some of our customers say, well, why would I want to do that? It's going to catch my driver texting when he gets into the accident. It's like, well, they're going to find that out anyways. What this does is it gets us to the truth faster.
Reality.
So it's the reality of what, because it is all going to come out. They're going to find out that he was texting or whatever. So you're better off having that truth come out quickly and come to a conclusion of the claim and the situation, because in construction, and I know my statistics a little old, but I remember reading about construction defect claims that, you know, when something goes wrong and years later it comes up, that up to 60% of the cost of the claim is the litigation itself. It's not even fixing the problem. It's actually figuring out who is at fault.
Yep.
You can eliminate 60% of a claim by just getting to the truth faster. You've now, you know, there's an incentive right there to reduce your claims costs. You know, from an owner's perspective, you know, there are ways, you know, you see owners taking on more risk, and we've seen the pendulum swing both ways. One where the owners has pushed all risk down, pushed it all towards the contractors. Contractor pushes it to the subcontractor, and it goes down to the lowest totem that has very poor insurance and can't cover it anyways. To the pendulum swinging the other way, where the owner is taking on a lot of the risk. They bring in a owner-controlled insurance program where all the insurance for everything that goes wrong falls under them. So instead of having your GC having their coverage and their subcontractors, the subcontractors, all these different groups having their own insurance, which is all going to fight against each other to prove who is really at fault. The owner has said, well, ultimately it's my
and relaxation. And so, I mean, to me, that's sort of what I would think of as, I mean, no one's ever asked me that question. I think it's a really good question, actually. I'm going to think more about that long after this is over.
All right, now we need to know who asked the question and what the question was. Now that we got, what about 53 people in here?
Oh, gosh.
And the question was, why did Autodesk spend $1 billion on Innovize today?
That was the question. He's got it in one.
Right?
That was exactly what, and if you listen to her answer, she answered it correctly.
Because I just renewed my software.
Oh man, so many comments.
All right.
They can.
I didn't think Autodesk would outdo themselves with PlanGrid, but geez, hold my beer.
Yeah.